So, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not a developer, so I'm going to give you a very superficial introduction to the development process. So the process is knowing what to do, how to do it, and not reinventing the wheel, right? You want to be able to create the good stuff, follow simple patterns, and not really have to think too much about the different processes. The other thing you want to be able to do is you want to be able to avoid common mistakes. So again, you don't want to use your precious brain too much, but you want to follow the simple rules and processes which will make you better. So a process will help you work efficiently. Now this is the quote that this is sort of a motto at Atlassian, do less better. The idea is that we want to be the best we can be and let our strategies and our tactics follow those overlying strategies. And I'll show you a little bit more about what that means specifically within the Confluence team. The other thing you want to do is you want to avoid obviously costly mistakes. And you want to be able to determine what's important, what's not important, what you should focus on, what you don't need to focus on, and you want to be able to make those decisions confidently. So one of the Agile Manifesto points was people over process. And so, you need to have some process, but processes are not going to solve your tasks, right? And processes are not going to turn your worst or your dumbest or your stupidest employee into your genius, right? But you have to realize that people are your most valuable asset, right? So the problem is, though, if you don't have any process and you're working on an important project, you're going to wreck that project. And so it doesn't matter if everyone on the team is a genius or not. If you don't have some type of framework in place, you're going to fall. So there's a couple of different processes. There's the traditional IT process. It has lots of rules. It's very difficult. It's change the process. It's difficult to change the deliverables because the customer is looking for specs that you keep sending them these specs. And you use sort of this Fordian production of software, which basically means you create this assembly line and you create these silos. Like this person works on this piece, this person works on this piece, and that's something that with Agile development you avoid doing. And I'll get into that a little bit more later as well. The other thing is, even if you have a really good process, if you leave it uncontrolled, it'll get heavier and heavier and heavier until it eventually breaks. And so you want to make sure that the work life that you have for your developers or your team is positive, right? And these lightweight processes, they focus on less rules and more common sense. And so with that, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can start the process that's proven to work, and you can adjust that process to fit whatever it is specific to your team. So here's some examples of different processes and the intensity. You have cowboy coding, which is good for small teams. The problem is as you go bigger and bigger, you might find that some of your code base becomes a liability. So there's no rules. It's great if you're just a guy who wants to develop on the weekends, or you have someone who's building some small project. And then you have extreme programming, or XP, which has many simple rules. It's sort of best practices and values. It's lightweight, but it's strict, and it works good for small and medium teams. And then you have Scrum, which is more of a framework, a process framework, which gives you lots of useful patterns, often used at the top of, on top of XP. So you have some of these basic practices, or best practices rather, and values, and then you have the framework on top of that, and that's good for medium-sized team. And that's what Atlassian does around the Confluence project, is we have sort of a mix of Scrum and XP. And then you have the rational unified process, which is quite heavy rules. It's used for large departments. It's more about delivering documentation than actual working software. But efficiency itself is not enough. So it's fundamental that everybody works towards the same goal. So you have to have an overlying strategy and have everyone focused in that same direction. But what if the goal changes, or you're not quite sure about the goal, or it's only partially defined, or you find halfway through that the idea that you have is not very good? Well, with traditional waterfall processes, you often fail because you are delivering projects that are down the line. And sometimes you find out that what a customer thought they really needed, in the end they don't actually use. So you've developed this piece of software or this application that has functionality in it that's not really relevant to the customer any longer. So we use an iterative process, which usually means incremental. And so what we do at Atlassian is we have what's called a 98-day release cycle. And we do this with all of our products. Essentially what that means is we have this continuous circle of analyzing and planning and implementing and testing and evaluating every 2 weeks our product, right? And for example, what we do is we build these what's called milestone releases. And these milestone releases then are deployed internally. And we're lucky because we have 2 instances of Confluence that are very popular. We have what's called EAC, or extranet.atlassian.com, and we have CAC, which is called confluence.atlassian.com. The EAC is for internal users only. The CAC is for external users. And generally what we do is we release all the milestone releases on EAC. We get a bunch of feedback from 250 people on whether or not this is actually a good feature, if it's broken, if there's a bug, if whatever the issue is, right? And then from that, then we can release that out into the wild once we have a better understanding. So it gives us a really good understanding of what's going on with our products, how we can gather feedback, and how we can use that feedback moving forward. So then, what is it about Atlassian that makes us agile? Well, because we use feedback, because we're accepting change and embracing change, it helps us make sure that we're always delivering working software. And so what we do is we spend our time, we don't spend our time on planning at the start of a project. We actually spend time planning throughout the entire project. And I'll explain that a bit more. But what we do is we accept that some parts need to be extended, some parts need to be reduced, some parts need to change, and the changing that costs money. But that's okay, because we didn't spend a lot of time at the beginning in the planning phases, right? So we're working as we go along. So, how do you go from an idea to an actual product? Let me walk you through how Atlassian does it. First, you have the planning dilemma, right? And this is a quote that's been used hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, if not thousands. Plans are nothing, planning is everything. And so, planning will add overhead to your development cycle, right? And these plans can come, but actual plans can become outdated, right? So it's important that you keep the process going as you go along. And some of these things that you think about, you can't even really imagine. If you come up with a plan, you're gonna miss some things. It's inevitable that you'll miss some things that'll happen if you create a plan. But if you go planning, different things pop up, different things drop off, and it's a way of understanding. So, but if you don't plan, you'll end up committing to too much. And that's another problem. Or you'll forget some of these tasks completely. You'll also end up working on all the cool stuff at the beginning, and then at the end, you'll notice that like late at nights and on weekends, you're working on stuff that you don't want to do. So the quality then starts to get worse because you're doing the stuff that you don't really want to do. Or you'll find yourself doing double work, and you'll find yourself being inefficient. And really that goes against the quote that I said at the beginning, which is do less better. And that's really what we want to focus on, is doing less better. So, first step, we collect all of the different ideas and we put them all on the table, right? And we say, these are all the different things that could possibly happen, or at least that we're thinking right now could potentially happen, right? So we collect all this data. And then we prioritize that data, right? We say, okay, this is number 1, this is number 2, and we start to assign that as it goes down, and we put all the cards in a particular order. And then we start to estimate, okay, how much time is it going to take us to do this? How complicated is it? We start to realize, what is involved to make this a reality. And in estimating, we actually work in relative units. You do not want to work in specifics because you're not going to know exactly how long it's going to take you to develop a feature. But what we do is we involve all of the developers that are involved in that particular project and say, how long do you think it will take to do this? What is your estimation? And we get an idea. And it's not to be punitive. It's not to penalize them for doing more or less work. The idea is that we assign things numbers. So if it's really complicated, it gets a high number, like a 16. If it's very easy, it gets a low number, right? And if we know in a quarter we could do 32 items, right? 32 points, if you want to call it that, we do 32 points. Then we know at the end of a quarter, if we came in at 30, we had maybe some complications. Where did those complications come in? Or were we able to do 34? We were You know, we're ahead of schedule, but it gives us an understanding not so much for who's been doing what work, but what it will take us for future planning. And that's the idea. You don't want to be, it's not about, you know, keeping developers on a schedule. It's about making sure that you understand how long it will take to accomplish a goal moving forward. So we use what's called planning.